the Varn blog. It's easy for me to yell at social democrats or democratic socialists, whatever nom de plume they think putting certain words in certain order fixes, for acting like progressives and falling for the same problems progressives have historically fallen for, which is calling for social reforms that are piecemeal and incoherent, often contradictory to each other, being betrayed by the party which they are relying to make those social reforms, as they do not have enough of an outside financial base to control them. And then whining about that while remaining loyal to said party, taking wildly radical stance piecemeal, sometimes on foreign policy where they have the least effect, sometimes in other areas where they can signal their radicalism, virtueness, or want for change, and yet achieve nothing. I expect that from progressives as part of their whole history. I do not expect it from socialists, and yet there's effectively no difference between the two in the United States of America right now. And you see this by the fact that the social democrats and the progressives have officially re-merged in the places like the nation, where Bhaskar Sankara and people are now editorial heads. Furthermore, you see the same arguments made by these people for having patience with the squad, the DNC made for having patience with the centralist Democrats. And yet, they've achieved even less. The New Democrats merging in 1976 actually got most of their agenda fairly quickly. We have not. This is a position we are in. But being righteously angry about that feels good. I am given to it. It's my prime vice and unskillful habit. It is unskillful. It does not help achieve either my interest or the interest of my politics. The anger emerges from a real and healthy place. The realization of injustice, the realization of exploitation, oppression, domination, and how even a stabilized capitalist future and vaguely reformist politics of things that just made rational sense even for the capitalist point of view, such as dealing with broad scale market failures, dealing with insurance misalignments, etc., don't even seem possible anymore. Moral hazard is now only on small individuals and not on major ones, because those major corporations can't have moral hazards because they're not really people. And yet we treat them as such and make pensioners' pensions dependent on them. But we're mad about how the current social democratic wave is probably going to go down with the Biden administration if things don't change. And their role in the resistance is going to be a lot harder to sell to people, since so much of Trump era policies have remained the same. And you can be angry about that. And you can point out how incompetent the Republicans are. But frankly, that is the only thing keeping anybody listening to you. And if we are honest, the progressive demand to try to change the system within the system has wedded people back to the Democratic Party in such a way that it is even harder to imagine real outside systemic challenges to it than before Bernie Sanders. Remember what I always said, the function is what it does. The function of a thing is what it does. Now, I can be righteously angry about that, but that makes no more difference. It just merely signals my virtue, my frustration, my alienation. And any supposed militancy that comes from that is rooted in those deeply anti-solidaristic flaws. Sometimes you have to breathe in, take stock of where you really are, and adjust. Where are you really? Are you projecting your hopes in places where you have no political control in other countries? Are you pretending that the same factors that affect the major countries don't affect the other ones? Have you not noticed that the left has been almost consistently wrong on foreign policy predictions? Do you think that taking radical stances in your own country while still supporting the party that is currently sending r- rifles for the IDF to distribute to settlers in the West Bank going to just all of a sudden find its moral character? I mean, the thing about Biden is more ghoulish. He's reversed even the peons to Palestinian selfhood that Obama made in lieu of the silent intifada. Biden can't even bring himself to do that. And for all of the good he did in wrapping down Afghanistan, we've seen the expansion of now proxy wars of which U.S. is involved and throwing other nations in and out of it in a kind of complex game of brinksmanship where in which nobody really has control, not even NATO. Being angry may be the place to start. It may get you your motivation. It wakes you up, brings you out of the burnout and moral numbness, but it's not good for you. You see, one of the ironies that I've noticed of the left is the left tells everyone society is broken, but they're also fine as they are. I'm not here to tell you that. You are not fine, most likely. You're probably not okay. And part of the responsibility for fixing that is on you. It is. The appeal to someone like Jordan Peterson is incoherent, benzo addicted guy who spews conservative platitudes and the most postmodern gobbledygook you've ever heard. But the irony is that why he appeals to people is he tells people a truth. You have to get your own house together to deal with the things I'm talking about, to not make the same mistakes, to not be manipulated because you're angry, because you're living in your limbic system. No matter whether or not the source of your anger is just, and often justice, frankly, the way we use it is just a fairy tale for children. But let's assume that there's some substance to justice, that there's a meaning to the word that makes sense. Even if what you're saying is just and correct, what is it doing? Do you have skin in the game? And do you even know how to get skin in the game? And then, can you suppress your emotional responses enough to have discipline? And the answer that I see for most of you is no, you can't. You can't have message discipline. You respond to too many on Twitter, and you're rewarded for that, and you build cadres for that, but you don't do anything with it. Just take a breath. Breathe all the way down into your sacral, where you feel your diaphragm goes into your sacrum, into your diaphragm. Feel it go down. Realize where you're at and who you are or aren't, and start making a real appraisal of what you can and cannot do. I'm going to tell you a story from history about how we got into this mess with the Democrats and how we seemingly never can get out of it. And one of the problems that you have in the United States is we don't have a parliamentary democracy. It's hard to play the two major parties off of each other in the same way. Although in parliamentary democracies, usually there does end up being either two major parties or a coalition of two sides. It tends to sort out very similarly ultimately. But there is a way to effect change that there just isn't in the United States. Both the Popular Front and the United Front assumed a parliamentary system. In the original United Front status is kind of hinted at by Marx and Engels' letters to Liebknecht and Babel. The reason to enter government and run elections was to prove you have power, but then to disrupt the government itself, to deny it funding, to not vote for taxes. The biggest reason why Marx and Engels both threatened to leave the SPD or the Eisenkers or whoever is because they are either forming unity groups without laying down conditions enough, or they're funding the government and participating in it without having real power, thus potentially making their constituency, arguably the working class, subordinated and dependent on a government which they don't control. What have you been doing? Have you been doing that? That was what the United Front really originally was. You cannot rule with these parties, but you can operate them. Sometimes they get reforms that you need to bring works to power, but most of the time to stop the worst from happening. During the Second International, the meaning of the United Front changed, but it still basically meant no hard consolidations from above with the bourgeois party. It was kind of divided into the United Front from below, where you could join with non-socialist and non-communist workers, in unions and other workers' apparatuses, and then into the United Front from above, where you joined with parties but never fully endorsed them. You would act together, but you wouldn't co-govern together. So you wouldn't form a unity government, for example. Well, the history of the left in the United States is different. There is the Socialist Party, which has its roots in the IWW, in the miners' strikes, and was very Marx-ish. But there was also the People's Party, or the Populist Party, it's called both. It was agrarian populist. Its primary political base was small farmers and sharecroppers, and it had allegiances with workers' groups. It was really formed in the late 19th century. It had some of the same problems that you'd expect from that, although not all the populists were racist. The racism of the populists is often greatly overstated. It was an important fact in working class and agrarian labor organization in the southern and western United States, but it completely collapsed after it nominated the Democrat William Jennings Bryan as its presidential candidate. The party was formed out of the Farmers Alliance, which was an agrarian movement group that kind of was a set of craft guilds for farmers, and the Greenback Party, which advocated fiat money very early on, loose money policies, before there was even chartalism. You know, chartalism wasn't even totally articulated yet. It was just being articulated in Germany when this was coming around. But it was the idea that if you increase liquidity and went back to the kinds of fiat money that was held in the colonies way back, before uh, before international trade kind of forced the U.S. to deal either in internal currencies or in gold, um, there might be more money to go around to pay off debt. It was a deliberately inflationary, debt-reducing political move. The populists in general were for collective bargaining, taking a stronger form of that than the Knights of Labor did. They were for striking. The Knights of Labor opposed it. Federal regulation of railroad, expansionary monetary policy, proto-Keynesianism before Keynes, proto-Chartism before Chartists, and a treasury plan that required the establishment of federally controlled warehouses to aid farmers by sucking up excess production and stabilizing prices. They also called for bimetallism when they couldn't get fiat currency, which was using both gold and silver for international trade. Graduated income tax, which became a progressive demand. Direct election of senators, which has mostly happened. A shorter work week, which was later picked up by the workers' movement, and the establishment of a U.S. postal savings system a la Japan. It won 8% of the popular vote in 1892 and even had showdowns with certain groups. It got endorsed by Eugene Debs before Debs actually founded the Socialist Party, and by the former Knights of Labor guy, Terence Powderly. But they didn't really win the vote of urban industrial labor in the Midwest and Northeast that were still loyal, primarily actually at the time, to the Republicans. By nominating a co-ticket with William Jennings Bryan, who was a progressive religious fundamentalist raised in Illinois, but was very important in the South, who opposed the Bourbon Democrats, who were the conservative Democrats' predecessors to the Dixiecrats, postcessors to the Confederate Democrats within the party. By consolidating the two and the sharecropping base falling out of a large part of the South and the Midwest, the Populist Party collapsed. So a party that could command almost 10% of the popular vote ceased to exist the moment it made a deal with the Democrats, which subsumed most of its remaining members and left the rump party that was given to paranoia. Debs went on to take on more and more Marxist-inspired tactics, mixing both Second International Marxism and syndicalism in a unique blend that was popular in the United States and got him up to 18% of the vote. However, unable to deal with the situation with the emerging Soviet Union and the SPUSA not able to agree with the 21 points that established one's membership in the Third International, the SPUSA was not able to adjust itself to the reality of the communist legacy of the Bolshevik Revolution, and the CPUSA sort of split the socialist movement here. The CPUSA, however, thrived in the period of third periodism. While third periodism was a disaster in Europe, it was successful in the United States because it prevented the socialists from entering an alliances with the Democrats. It led to the TUEL and the TUL and the CPUSA's organizing of black labor, etc. These were strengths for the CPUSA and also put it in a good position to fight fascism, which the SPA was not able to do. I think I said SPUSA earlier. That's a later party. So many acronyms here, but it's important to keep this up. But with the advent of the end of third periodism, with the Hitler-Stalin Pact, and then later on with the establishment of the Popular Front, one sees basically the collapse of the communist movement as separate from the Democrats. However, their key roles in anti-fascism and their allegiance with the Democrats in World War II meant that this was the high period of Communist Party growth in the United States, but it led quickly to a backlash, a suppression, and a complete falling away, with massive loss of membership going down from like 60,000 in 1948 to like 5,000 by the end of the 60s. This similar had the SDS and the New Left's relation to the Democrats had a similar trajectory. While factionism and sectarianism were also a problem, liquidationism is huge. This current left started out liquidating itself into the Democratic Party. Its attempt to briefly emerge and answer the problems of Obama's failure to deliver on politics in his first term on the political promises that he manifested led to Occupy Wall Street. It didn't happen with the onset of the recession. It happened when the recession was not cleaned up in a way that helped young people or an established left. Now, there's been new stories about the PMC and downwardly mobile people becoming corrupted in this process, pushed on many people. I'm not here to debate that one way or the other. People know my stances on the PMC as a class, but I do think there's elite categories of workers who are basically subsumed into the Democratic Party establishment. But then the DSA did the same thing. Now, I'm trying to run down 130 years of U.S. Political history on the left for you, but to illustrate that at every one of these turns, it's been a disaster. Now, we can be mad about that. We can rail about it. We can call the hypocrites out, and that has its function. Don't get me wrong. But if you think there's any incentive for the Democratic Party to answer people who are essentially captured by it, if you think you can change that, you're wrong. If you think you can run a candidate that's going to try to primary Biden and push him to the left, and that won't lead to Biden losing and you being blamed from that and the Democratic Party moving further to the right, which we've literally seen happen multiple times, you're wrong. You're not paying attention to history. Democratic Party funding comes from the same capital bosses that have no loyalty to national movements anyway. Capital flight is real. And while it's not going to destroy a major country like the US, it is a real enough threat that politicians have to take it seriously, if only for their own reelection. Because capital flight also happens within the country. The federalization of the US makes that also a possibility. So, yeah, you can get mad about it, you can scream, you can talk about what's going on abroad, and yet you'll do nothing about it the way you have currently organized yourself. Take a breath, breathe all the way in, get calm, look at the situation, and tell yourself, once I give up these illusions, what can I do? I don't know the answer to that. I'm just pointing out where the illusions probably lie. Like and subscribe, hit the bell. More power to you. Try to be skillful. Try to be aware. Have message discipline. Have personal discipline. Take care of yourself. Cultivate your virtues. Protect your peace. It is your duty to do so. Not because you are an individual, but because we need you to be your best self. For your sake and for ours.